Yes, so once upon a time, I was a very successful, thriving therapist, and I literally didn't even have to advertise. I was just known, and I had a thriving business. However, I'm sitting at my desk one morning, 25th of March 2021, that date I'll never forget, and in pops an email from the BACP. We open them because they've usually got a survey or an invitation to an event inside them. This one had, "We've received a complaint against you." Very abrupt.
Welcome to the Good Enough Counsellors podcast. I'm Josephine Hughes, and today I'm welcoming coach and therapist Susie Jamieson. Susie's one of my therapy growth group members, and we first got in touch when Susie was exploring her niche. There's a saying, you don't find your niche finds you. And Susie's niche is something we'll be talking about more today.
I think, if anything, my niche has moved from working with men and due to my own life experiences and what I went through being complained about, I feel so passionate about supporting therapists that part of my own journey was to speak up, and people are just finding their way to me for all sorts of reasons.
So first of all, Susie, welcome.
Thank you.
It's very nice to have you here. Lovely to see you on the podcast. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about you and your practice? Because I know you've got lots of different skills that you bring to your practice, haven't you? So would you like to tell us about, where you are and what your practice is like?
I would love to. Thank you. So I'm in private practice, BACP accredited therapist. I'm also a qualified coach. I'm also emotional freedom technique practitioner, EFT. So I use a blend of those aspects in my work. But I'm also a breathwork practitioner, and I find that I have this thing that I call meeting the mind in the body through the breath. So when we do breathing in our sessions, it helps clients to sort of loosen up a bit. And I find after a short breathwork session, they talk more.
That's so interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting what happens. And so I kind of use a typical blend of letting the client talk, doing some breath work around deep emotions, finding where they're hanging out in the body. So there's a bit of somatic experiencing as well. And then when they come back out of the breath work and they talk, and then we'll use some tapping to help neutralize any emotions that are still hanging around or anything that's been particularly strong. Yeah. That's not to say that's the only way I work, but that's kind of one of my kind of core go-tos.
So now this is just to sort of introduce the fun part of your personality, Susie. In our recent live feed challenge, you told us a fun fact. Can you remember what it was? Just thought it might help to introduce you to them.
This always helps people remember me. I am a qualified pole dancing teacher and a qualified burlesque dancing teacher. But that's not where it stops. I didn't learn to teach those two things because I wanted to teach them. I got into them through my own healing when I was going through trauma. And one of the things I wanted to do was to learn to dance. And there was a guy who used to teach street dance in my gym. And I used to watch with envy these people being able to move so fluidly. Yeah. And I went up to him one day and I said, "Oh, will you teach me to dance, please?" In private. And he said, "Yeah, I'll look after you, darling." Anyway, so we went into this studio with no windows, and in my first lesson there was a pole, and I thought, oh gosh, I thought a different word, but I'll not say that on your podcast.
You were very brave, actually, really brave to actually approach him and ask him. And
that was the brave thing, but it was even braver, actually. I am not going to let this guy know that I'm scared and I don't know what I'm doing. So he taught me to pole dance.
Wow.
And he said to me, "You're very elegant. And I think burlesque would be a really good thing for you." So I thought, oh, okay. Wow. So I went off and did a short course, did a performance and got a standing ovation. I didn't do the typical tassel piece. I refused to take my clothes off. I kept it very dancey and told a story through dance.
Yeah.
And then I thought, gosh, there's such therapeutic benefit in this. So I developed this thing called creative dance therapy, which is all about helping people use the medium of pole dancing and burlesque dancing and dressing up and wearing masks to feel more comfortable in their body, to connect with their sensuality And it's great for people who've been sexually abused, physically abused, operated upon. It's very powerful.
Dancing is just such a powerful thing, isn't it? Because it sort of seems to bring out, we can express so much with our body through dance.
We can. Yeah. And I think when you've got a pole to hold on to, it's almost like you've got a dance partner that isn't going to criticise you.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then when you put a mask on and you dress up, you can step into being somebody who you're not. So there's a lot of play involved. Whereas if you're just dancing on your own, you can feel quite self-conscious. And that, I think that's one of the reasons why I loved pole dancing and burlesque dancing so much.
Yeah. So you actually got clients who would come and have dance therapy?
Absolutely. And at once upon a time, in this room that I'm sitting in now was once my therapy room in a different guise. And I had a pole in the middle of it with a 4x6 mirror on the wall and 2 chairs. And when I first started in private practice, I used to say to people, just to let you know, I'm also a pole dancing teacher. When you come into the room, there is a pole. Please don't let that put you off. And people would come in and they go, oh, yeah, and sit down and they'd have their talking therapy. And one day I was working with I'll say, just an elderly gentleman. And he stood up after about several sessions. He stood up and went, is this a pole? And I said, yeah. He said, oh, can I have a go?
Oh, wow.
No, you can't, because there was other reasons why he couldn't. But he hadn't noticed it. Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? Wow. But you don't do that any longer, do you?
I don't do that anymore. Lockdown put a stop on anything, because you can't do that online. You really can't. It's not safe enough to do online. But, I'm getting a bit old and cranky and creaky.
Yeah. And you do now work exclusively online, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And we'll sort of maybe circle round to why that is in a little while.
Yes.
So when we first properly talked to each other, it was after you'd been to one of my Finding Your Niche workshops.
Yes.
And you were really struck because when you sort of looked at the clients that you like to work with, you realised that a lot of them were actually men in a particular situation. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that, about sort of clients you worked with?
I think that there is a misunderstanding in society that men abuse women. Mm-hmm. Yes, men do abuse women, but women also abuse men. But it's harder for men to speak up about that. Women have women's refuge. They have places that they can go. Social services are far more readily set up for a woman who's a victim of domestic violence than they ever would be for a man. And what I found was that I felt so passionate about giving men more space to feel safe to talk about their experiences. And we had a very unfortunate experience in our own family of something along these lines. Yeah. And so there's a backstory.
Mm-hmm. There's that sort of empathic awareness maybe that you've got through your own experience. Yeah. Because I know sort of a lot of it is the pain of estrangement, isn't it? Of estrangement from their children.
Absolutely.
And how difficult that can be where perhaps they haven't got the access that they would want to their children, or it's made difficult for them, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have quite a different experience because the male is more likely to leave the family home. The male is more likely to, if it's an owned home or a part-owned home, to lose that. They're more likely to be very restricted on when they can see their children.
Yeah.
They may also turn to unhelpful coping mechanisms, and that can then lead on to have a negative impact on their career.
Yeah, so
it's
it might
just a different experience.
Yeah, substance abuse or whatever.
Yeah.
I've certainly worked with men where they've just felt the easiest thing was to just walk away. Yeah. I know this is often not the case for women, but sometimes what happens is the man will just give up everything, won't they? And say, well, she can have the lot. It's just easier just to walk away. And it can leave them, financially in quite a difficult circumstance. So I know, obviously women can suffer a lot with the financial circumstances as well. But I think it's acknowledging that this can happen to men too, from what you've told me and the men that you've worked with.
Yeah. It's just, it comes packaged in a different way. It's just a different experience. You know, two people are getting divorced, but they're both going to be having a very different experience of their relationship breakdown and the subsequent divorce and what happens thereafter.
Yeah. And of course, there's a really big part of your story that you're here to share with us, that actually is a really sort of difficult situation that you experienced, which is something that you're beginning to talk about. So would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So once upon a time, I was a very successful, thriving therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally didn't even have to advertise. I was just known, and I had a thriving business. And I can't say very much about how the situation arose, but there was a period of time before what I'm about to tell you happened. There's a lot of backstory behind it. But then one day, things went awry, and ultimately a client complained about me.
Mm-hmm. That must have been awful, Susie. Tell us about, I think it's one of the things that so many of us dread. So tell us about what it was like when you realised that you'd been complained about.
Oof, I don't wish to scare your listeners. However, I'm sitting at my desk one morning, 25th of March 2021, that date I'll never forget. And in pops an email from the BACP. We open them because they've usually got a survey or an invitation to an event inside them. This one had, "We've received a complaint against you."
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Very abrupt. And that word "against" throws you into an arena of opposition and hostility. It's just you and a complainant, really. And neither of you want to lose because you're both opposing sides of an experience.
Yeah.
Like the man and the woman, if they're going through the divorce, the man has a different experience from the female. But it shook my world. It is like, it's a shocker.
I imagine, it's just that huge, if it was me, like huge heart sink moment, and just going into like feeling cold and panicky. That's the way I think I probably would react if I received a complaint. So tell us what happened.
I was shocked, and I had quite a significant visceral experience. Thinking about it, I can just feel my body literally shaking. And I had a lot of fear. I had a tremendous amount of fear and a lot of shame. And so I was never without one or the other. They just vowed all the time. It was like a little sort of tipping scales. One of them was always weighing the scales down. It was either fear or shame.
And this was sort of, like you said, one of them was always there. So this
always,
was like,
for years. This is the whole cycle for me took 3 years. Not because it took 3 years to get through the complaint. That took 20 months.
It's still a long time. Yeah.
It's a very long time to be in a state of shame and fear.
Absolutely.
But the ripple effect doesn't stop when the case comes to its final conclusion.
Yeah.
For some people, it may stop, but it certainly didn't for me and other therapists that I speak to. They are literally left trying to rebuild themselves, personally and professionally, once the complaint comes to a conclusion.
Because I know I've read about, when we talked about this in the Good Enough Counsellors group, there was somebody who said, "I've just never been able to go back to private practice. Now I don't actually counsel people anymore. I teach counselling, but I don't actually counsel people anymore." It's a really massive thing to overcome, isn't it?
It's huge.
And I guess that's sort of testament to you as well, that you have been able to come back. But tell us more about the process and what happened to you and, during that sort of 20 months to 3 years.
The process is it's literally just an admin process. It has a series of checks, assessments, it makes decisions, and it operates on its own timeline. And I talk about it in those terms. I made that little sentence up myself. You're welcome. But underneath this admin process that is very objective is a therapist having a horrendous experience. We give an awful lot of ourselves into our work. We're not just turning up to a job and we processing a document. We are our brand. We are our business. So we're going to take it very personally. And
Yeah.
I've yet to meet a therapist that hasn't. You're given an opportunity right at the beginning to do a preliminary response. You don't have to, but it may help you if you do. And when you hear those words, you think, well, of course I'm going to. If it's going to help me, of course I'm going to give a response.
Yeah.
And my way of doing it was to tell the BACP everything that had happened in detail with evidence.
Yeah.
And this is why your supervision notes are important. This is why it's really important to have your case notes, because without either, you are in the absence of evidence. And here's a little note for therapists just to prick their ears up to. If you don't take notes, that's okay. There is no legal obligation for you to do that. But if you get complained about, part of the complaints process will ask you to justify why you don't have notes.
You need to know that you've got a rationale for not keeping notes.
Yeah. So on one hand, it's absolutely okay not to keep notes, but you might be questioned why, which for me feels a bit out of sync with the process. It is what it is. So I told the BACP everything. And the night before my preliminary response was due in, I had a complete meltdown.
Yeah.
Because the BACP say to you, and I'm sure other membership bodies say the same, you can share what is relevant and necessary. UKCP use the words necessary and relevant. BACP use the words relevant. Because the client has signed a declaration to say that they agree to that. If they don't agree, UKCP will not process the complaint. I don't know what BACP's position is on that. So I had this meltdown about one word, relevant. Who gets to decide what's relevant? Me, the complainant, the BACP, someone else? Because what might be relevant for my defence, the complainant may not think is relevant for what they're complaining about, and they may not want certain things disclosed. And I wanted to respect the complainant all through what I spoke about. When I responded to the BACP, that was really important to me. So I rewrote my entire document. I stayed up all night.
Yeah.
I had a 78-page document that I'd written, and I condensed it down to 38 pages. It's still 10,000 words.
Yeah.
But
my goodness.
I removed things that I was a bit worried may be perceived as not relevant. And I sent it off. You press the send button and your stomach hits your ankles.
Yeah, I bet.
And you wait and wait and wait. Now, I was expecting a response within a couple of weeks. It actually took 2 months.
Yeah. So just sitting there waiting. Yeah.
The waiting is agonising.
I bet.
And I'm sure that there are very good reasons behind the scenes inside the professional conduct team and, how the complaints checks are done and the assessments are made, because there's a threshold test, there's independent assessment committees, there's hearings, and sometimes you go through step by step and sometimes you go forward and then you go backwards. It just isn't a linear process. It's individualized. And the waiting just took its toll on me. I collapsed at the end of June, and that's when I first thought I'd be better off taking my own life than going through this.
Goodness, yeah.
That's the effect it had on me.
Yeah.
I actually felt that my body was being squeezed between two concrete walls. The pain in my body was so intense. I was really carrying a lot of stress, and I was struggling to work. I had to take time off work, and of course, take time off work, you get a withering bank balance as well. Yeah. So I'm happy to continue the story, but if you'd like to ask me further questions, I'm happy to be guided by you, Josephine, because I could talk about this literally for a week.
Like you say, it's an administrative process, but it's not an administrative feeling that we have on the other side, is it? It's not something that you can just put to one side and forget about, because actually, and it's not only about who I am as a counsellor, it's actually, this is my livelihood. Where will this take me? So, obviously there's that shame aspect as well. In feeling, probably, I imagine that it just makes you question whether you are actually an adequate counsellor. If I've been complained about, there must be something wrong, or I must be faulty in some way. I'm obviously not a good enough counsellor. Yeah.
I really questioned myself. I questioned whether I was somehow arrogantly deluded that I'd been any good at my job for the previous 9 years.
Yeah.
Why did all these clients come to me? Why did I get all this positive feedback? Was that not me? And you can hear the shock in that speak. When we go through a shock, whether it is being complained about, or whether it's having a road traffic accident or something else, shock kind of splits us. It fragments us. And I used to look back and think, whoa, was that me? Of course it was. But there was this part of me that I just couldn't quite connect back, because the shock had fragmented me so much.
Yeah.
And I questioned everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I spent, I had a lot of extra supervision, and the supervisor that I had when the complaint came in was somebody that was actually my line manager in my placement. So she'd worked with me since 2010 and, has had a relationship with me all that time. So she knew me well. And I'm so grateful for her that she didn't become my supervisor just a few months before I was complained about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, that...
Take an outside view, an external view.
Yeah, and your supervisor relationship is so important.
So tell us some more. Was the substance of the complaint sort of upheld? What happened?
Ultimately, this is interesting. This will bring up the point about it being a non-linear process. So one of the first places, or one of the early places you go to, is what's called an independent assessment committee. And that's a panel of a few people, somebody from professional standards, a lay person, a member of the public, and somebody, a BACP member. And they look at the complaint, they look at your preliminary response, they align that to the ethical framework and the professional standards documents, and they say, okay, so if this goes to a hearing and the complaint is upheld, is this a breach of ethical framework and professional standards? If the answer to that is yes, here's the allegations, you're going to a hearing. And that was the outcome of the first independent assessment committee. And I looked at it and I thought, you haven't read my response.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure they did. This is my experience. But they misquoted me on something. And I thought, how can you misquote something that's in writing?
Yeah.
That's a copy and paste, really.
Yeah.
So that, in my stress, in my shame, in my fear, in my panic, said to me, skim read, what was the point in me giving all of my time and all of my truth to be not heard or not understood and not believed?
Yeah.
So I was devastated.
I bet you were.
And then the wait and the wait and the wait. And so what I did, I ended up speaking to somebody who'd also been complained about through my supervisor. And they said to me, Susie, get a solicitor. So I got a solicitor and put in the response, and then you wait. And eventually the admin process woke up and it said, right, you're going to a hearing. And then something really unexpected happened. The complainant decided that they didn't want to continue. And many of the listeners might think, oh, well, that's good then, that's it, oh, it's all closed down. No, not at all. Just because a complainant pulls out, and they do pull out, by the way, the BACP make a decision, are we going to continue with this or not?
So because they deemed that you hadn't sort of been in line with the ethical framework and that you needed to go to a hearing, so they still sent you to the hearing despite the fact that the complainant had said, no, I don't want to take this any further.
No, they cancelled the hearing.
Oh.
Yeah, they cancelled the hearing and they have to go back to another step in the process.
Oh my God. So how come the hearing got cancelled?
Well, the hearing got cancelled for a number of reasons, of which I'm sure the complainant pulling out was probably one of them. But there was a couple of other things, like, we'd asked for a subject tax request, which we weren't given.
Just
things that would be difficult to talk about because nothing is ever straightforward. So the hearing got cancelled, and then they said, well, we'll get back to you about what happens next. And I'm just standing looking at the year thinking, I turned 60 in the summer and I am sick to death of this. This whole process wrecking through my life. And so I actually said to my solicitor, please tell them I'm not available between May and September, because I wanted to protect my birthday. It was a waste of time, actually, because I'd run out of money by then and I couldn't go and do what I wanted to do originally anyway. But they came back and said, it's going to be another independent assessment committee. And I thought, it's already been to an independent assessment committee. Why do I have to go again?
Yeah.
And they plonked it on a date where the output, the report outcome would have been literally the day before my birthday.
Oh, great.
So I was infuriated. And at that point, I realised I'm not important. I mean nothing. This is just a process. It's got its own series of checks assessments, decisions, timeline, all of it. I don't matter. What's going on in my life is neither hither nor thither. So I was very angry.
Yeah, I bet.
But the decision came out a few weeks before my birthday. And bearing in mind the first IAC report was 6 pages, 3 allegations, misquote, for whatever reason. And then this report came out. It would not be fair on the counsellor to pursue this.
Yeah.
What?
So after all that, was that the end of it? Was that 20 months or?
Yeah, that was after 20 months. That was the result I got. So that was, July 2022. And the complaint had been made at the end of 2020.
Yeah.
And you'd think, oh, great, you can go and celebrate. You can have your birthday. You can do this and you can do that. I was so shocked at the result. The result was more shocking than being complained about. I was a shaking, snotty, gasping for breath mess when that email came in. I had to get my sister-in-law on FaceTime just to have a human connection while I looked at the email.
Yeah. And
I won't tell you what my screech down into my laptop was, but there was a lot of expletives.
Yeah.
And it took me such a long time to reconcile it all. I can't really remember when I started to really speak up about being complained about. I think the fact that the case was dismissed has always been a help. I don't know if I'd speak as freely if I'd been sanctioned and named and shamed. I don't know.
Did you have a sort of intuition that this was going to be a difficult case? I'm just sort of thinking back to when I had somebody, and even on that first meeting, I remember thinking, oh, this is a bit peculiar. And it actually turned into quite a difficult situation. It didn't result in a complaint, but I thought it might do. Did you have that sort of intuition when you started or not? No.
The client and I actually had a very good therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
And I will never talk about what was going on as the relationship. It ruptured a lot, but we always repaired the ruptures. But there was I think there was a rupture too far. So much is unspoken, and it felt like through the complaints process or through the administration of it, no one was interested in what was a potential risk for me. I'm not contesting the intention of the administration process, but the experience of sitting underneath the weight of it and the unyielding impact it has on you, it's a very different experience to what's intended.
Yes.
And I think it's important that we get some dialogue around that so that we can do something about it.
Yeah. And this is actually beginning to happen, isn't it, as a result of you actually talking. I mean, this is the amazing thing, actually, is that it's such, I think, a stigmatized thing, if you have been complained about. And like you said, if I had been sanctioned in some way, would I have been able to talk about it? It's such a sort of stigmatizing thing. It's really difficult for people who've experienced a complaint to be able to talk about it, and it becomes shrouded in sort of mystery. And it's almost like nobody really wants to tackle it. But I think, what you're doing, it's like you were saying about there's so much that's unsaid. And actually what you're trying to do now is, okay, let's get this said. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about what it's like for people when they go through this. Yeah.
And the great news is that I'm a member of the BACP, so that's where the complaint was, and that's my membership body. But I will say, aside from the admin process, my experience of being a member of the BACP since 2008, long time ago.
Yeah.
I think that they are a fabulous governing body or membership body. I interchange those two terms, but when I needed to talk to them, they did listen because there were the admin process came to a stop and filed itself away.
Yeah.
Job done. The experience for me didn't stop there.
Yeah.
That wasn't the last I'd heard from the complainant So I did speak to the BACP and I said, I do not know what to do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I was put in touch with my insurers and, the legal helpline that you have with your insurers. I was put back in touch with my original solicitor. I was put in touch with the ethics support line at BACP. And I had a candid conversation with one of the established managers inside the BACP. And they really listened to me. And they asked me to put what I'd spoken to them about in writing, asked for permission to escalate it. And actually, ultimately, quite quickly as well, because this was just between September and December, the board, it was brought to the attention of the board. And that's when a decision was made to introduce the member support service,
Right.
which was then launched a year later. So anybody complained about now has access to 6 emotional support sessions. They're not therapy, but 6. They don't pay for them. 30-minute sessions that they can have access to in the course of a 12-month period. And so that proves that the BACP are listening and willing to listen. And I'm really proud of my significant contribution to that. But I'm also really happy that the BACP listened. And I think there are other opportunities for us to have dialogue. I mean, goodness gracious, they let me stand on stage at the private practice conference and speak about this. They let me swear. They let me really express myself. People in the audience were crying. They're letting this come into the space to be spoken about. And that is really important.
Because it did have a financial impact on you as well, didn't it?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So 25th of March 2021, the complaint landed in my inbox. 13th of July 2022, I got a final case dismissed. By the time the summer of 2022 came round, I was essentially living off credit cards. Not completely, because I didn't have a zero business, but I felt so ashamed at being complained about. My energy closed down. I wanted to hide. So when clients were coming to their natural end, my energy, and I am a great believer in energy. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's mine. New clients weren't coming in and replacing the ones that were leaving. And just to give you an example, between September 2020, I think it was 68 sessions I had. September 2021, it was 6.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So my loss of earnings and then the accumulated debt, I was out of pocket by an eye-watering £88,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It is. Yeah.
And when you're faced with my income is low and the 0% has come to the end on my credit cards and my business is growing. I'd turned my business around, but it was like everything coming in was going on a conveyor belt to Barclaycard. Yeah. This is a man who doesn't need much money, but it was flowing off in their direction. And I thought, okay, I have to do something about this because my current earnings were the same quantity as the debt that I owed. And that's technically bankruptcy. I didn't go bankrupt, but I could have. And so if you go bankrupt, you have to go to your membership body and say, hey, guess what? I've gone bankrupt. And I thought, I cannot have any further rippling effects of this complaint reaching far into my world. It's got to stop. So I put on my determined hat and I watched my bank accounts literally minute by minute. If I had 1 penny left over at the end of the day, that went to Barclaycard. If I had a good month and I say, right, I'm going to send them 1,400 quid, off it would go.
Yeah.
I barely even went out for a cup of coffee between September 2023 and March 2024. Everything that came in that I could possibly squeeze went to Barclaycard.
Yes.
I sold anything that moved in my house that I didn't need. But here's the bit that brings up the shame and the heartbreak so much that my mum knew that I really wanted this to come to an end.
Yeah.
And she gave me her jewellery. She gave me everything that was in our family heirloom line. Collectibles, jewellery, all sorts of things. And I found myself at the beginning of 2024 in auction houses selling this stuff. My inheritance has been sold to a stranger. I was selling my clothes on Vinted. I was selling stuff on Facebook. I opened my garage. People drive-bys. I sold £1,000 worth of rubbish from my garage. Very grateful for it, but it's gone.
Yeah, and that's the impact.
And the heaviness that I can feel, and I'm going to try not to cry, but the heartbreak and shame is so difficult to reconcile at the moment. When I see family photographs and I see something and think, oh my gosh, that's sold, it's really triggering for me. And I think I now need to go and work on this grief that has...
It is. It's massive, massive impact it had on you. And yet here you are along the way.
Yes.
You know, you are debt-free now, aren't you, as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally. I met my deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're here speaking about it.
Yes.
So, you know, and like I said, you know, for some people, it's something that they find it really difficult to recover from, in terms of, I don't dare work with clients again. So how have you found the courage to continue?
A lot of internal investigation.
Yeah.
A lot of internal investigation. I use breath work, meditation, tapping, yoga, walking in nature, swimming. Swimming is a wonderful thing for me because I actually reconnect back to my dad. My dad he missed the Olympics by the touch of a finger at the end of a pool.
Yeah.
He was that good a swimmer. So being in the water helps me connect back to my dad, but also being in cold water gets you present in your body. It's fabulous for mental health, absolutely fabulous. So yes, I do swim in very cold water, but that introspectiveness of, come on, right here, right now, you are not threatened. Right here, right now, you can choose to be okay. And I'd say in the last 10 days, I've probably had 7 or 8 inquiries.
Yeah.
You know, I've had a core business all the way through this, thank goodness. But now I'm in expansive, and I'm reaching the point where I may have to consider a wait list in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
But I do think I've opened up my energy, and my energy is ready to really expand my business back to what it was pre-complaint.
Yeah. I think you've integrated this experience now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Into who Susie is. And you're using it in a positive way. You're using it to help other people. And it's not only other counsellors, but also just the way you talk about things on your website. But I know that you do also offer support to therapists as well. So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
So I offer support for burnout and compassion fatigue, but I've called myself online the complaints counsellor, and speaking up very openly about, I can help you with all the operational stuff.
Yeah.
So demystifying all that documentation that you're going to be sent when you get a complaint notification, understanding the process, understanding where you are, helping you prepare, not in a legal way, that's your solicitor's job, but operationally I can help you. I come from a background of process management, change management, governance, working with big audit companies. I've got a good reputation in my previous career. But I carry within my heart so much compassion and unconditional understanding of people who've been complained about. And it's interesting as I say that, I'm thinking, little parts of me saying, but you had that anyway. You've worked with people who have been abusive to others, and you've been compassionate enough to understand them and help them recover and heal and move on. And so I don't judge whether the therapist has maybe done something inappropriate or is completely innocent. What I want to work with is how they're feeling. What's going on for them, because they're going to be crumbling to pieces. And that's the one thing that I couldn't find when I was on a quest to find a therapist. I literally started in Cornwall and went through all the cities all the way up to Aberdeen searching. I had so many introductory calls. And I just couldn't find someone to connect to. They just didn't seem to get it. And I even thought at times they don't want to get involved because maybe they might be asked to represent me at a hearing or something. Maybe they're frightened. And I just kept picking up things. And one therapist actually said to me, gosh, you are intuitive, aren't you? Because I'd clearly spoken into a part of them that was unsure whether they could work with me or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I want to offer.
Yeah, that support.
Yeah, you'll get
Yeah.
support from your solicitor. Absolutely. They make a lot of money out of complaints. You'll get support from your supervisor. At least I hope you do.
Mm-hmm.
And then, where else do you go? If you've got a great therapist, then carry on, stay with your therapist. But, I'm here and I will offer you drop-ins or longer-term arrangements.
Yeah.
I'm very flexible.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you, Susie. Thank you so much for telling your story. And I think it serves the profession as a whole, actually, what you're doing in terms of talking about it and allowing it to be spoken about, to bring that unspoken into consciousness, really. And I'll put the details of where people can find you as well, how they can contact you into the show notes. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we finish?
I think I'd just like to thank everybody who has listened to me, because being heard has been so cathartic for me.
Yeah.
And this extends to my friends who stopped me committing suicide. I had 2 really bad times when I was thinking about it. The second one was, right, how am I going to do it?
Yeah.
And they helped me so much. And I'm really glad they did, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. I really want to thank my supervisor, because she is amazing. And everybody in Good Enough Counsellors and the therapy growth group who have listened to me going, and complain, banging on about it, because I do. I'm well known for talking about it. But also I'd really like to thank the people that are finding their way to me and trusting me to open up to and tell me their story, and know that I will keep it confidential. I will keep it sacred. I mean, I want to shout from the rooftops about some of the things I've heard, but that's not what I'm here for. But I would also like to thank the BACP for listening to me as well, because they have.
Yeah. I think that's important to say as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Susie, for coming along.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure people will be really,
wonderful.
really interested and moved by this episode. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Do come and join my Facebook community, Good Enough Counsellors. And for more information about how I can help you develop your private practice, please visit my website, josephinehughes.com. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you could share it with a fellow therapist or leave a review on your podcast app. And in closing, I'd love to remind you that every single step you make gets you closer to your dream. I really believe you can do it.